Welcome to our conversation on Life 100 Plus, which is our research report into longevity, what it means for individuals, businesses and society, and in particular, finance. Today, I'm joined by Lindsey Rix-Broom, who's the CEO of Canada Life UK, and Lisa Edgar, who's the CEO of The Big Window and our research partner in this project. So Lisa, I'd like to start with you. Tell us all about the longevity megatrend and what it means.
Well, it's an interesting megatrend. It's often the one that gets forgotten. I've had many conversations like this, and often when you say what are the megatrends, people say AI or climate, and it takes a while for the longevity subject to come up. And it's an interesting word because when you talk about longevity, people think longer lives, and of course that's part of it, but it's actually about the big demographic shift. You know, people are having fewer children, the birth rates are lowering, and we are living longer. So there's a huge shift in the weight of the population to the older ages. So if I give you an example globally, which is true across many countries across the world, at the moment, 1 in 10 of every person you pass in the street will be over 65. In the next 25 years, it will be 1 in 6. So every 6th person will be over 65. And then 50 years hence from there, 1 in 4, 1 in 4. So then if you take, that's true in the UK as well, the over 65s are the fastest growing population cohort here in the UK. But if you take that down to a consumer level, half of the UK consumers are over 50 at the moment. So by that I mean those people making decisions over 18. And a quarter of the over 18 consumers are over 65 right now in the UK. So that in terms of a mega trend, there's been a massive shift towards this sort of later part of our life. So we really need to kind of change, you know, how we think about that. And it matters because we spend differently as we get older, and we're making more complex financial decisions as we move through those older years. So it's really an important megatrend for us.
Wow, yeah, that's really interesting. Lindsey, can I come to you? What does this mean for Canada Life?
Yeah, well, as Lisa's just explained, I mean, goodness, some of those statistics you just said are really eye-opening, aren't they? I mean, for us as a company, we work in the areas of life insurance, in pensions, in annuities. And so obviously it has an impact on us in terms of the products that we offer to our customers and to our customer base. But equally, it has an impact to all of us, doesn't it, in society? So whether it be our colleagues, how we're employing people and how we will employ people in the future and what our working lives are going to look like. It matters to us as individuals. You know, what are we thinking about our future planning, our retirement, our family, how are we talking to our family about all of that, as well as obviously as a society, the products and services that we offer our customer base and the role that we have to help kind of shape that and help navigate that and make it easier for people.
Lisa, why is it important for us to be talking about longevity?
Look, the moment is now. It really is. You know, we've seen this shift. It wouldn't have been so long ago. And I think Lindsey and I, you know, will remember talking about this, you know, where you would have been in retirement. You would have been expected to be in retirement for 5, 10, maybe 15 years. Now you'll be in that later life stage for, you know, 20, 25, 30 years. And you know, Lindsey, you referred to both supply side and demand side dynamics. And we agree, we think longevity, the mega trend, is important on both sides of that equation. From a supply side, providers and Canada Life are completely cognizant of this, are going to have to set up their products and the way that they support advisors and consumers for longer lives. What does that mean? How early? When do those conversations happen? What products do we provide for that? From an advisor perspective, we've definitely noted that you know, the conversation hitherto has been around financial planning, almost as a series of moments in time. We think that conversation needs to be more flexible, more dynamic, and needs to mature to something along the lines of lifetime planning to reflect the longer lives. So a mind shift in how we kind of think about that terminology. And then on the demand side for consumers, you know, their expectations of a longer life are developing. They don't just want to live longer. They don't even want to live longer more healthily. They want to live longer, more healthily, and in a more full way. We all want that, right? So it's not just for them, it's not just about lifespan. It's not even about health span, it's about full span. And that, for me, is why it's so important, and so important to have this conversation now, why we're delighted to be having this chat with you.
And Lindsey, what does it mean for our customers?
Gosh, well, it means all sorts, doesn't it? And I like the concept that Lisa's just talked about around lifetime planning. You know, I think people need to be thinking, planning, discussing much earlier what their goals and ambitions are for their lives in all ways, as you said, whether it be about health, whether it be about work, whether it be about family, how you're going to live a full, enriched life. But you actually need to start having that conversation really quite early on. You know, so having those kind of lifetime planning conversations, I think, is really, really important. And I also, you know, we start talking, don't we, about the retirement of the word retirement, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, do we really seriously think that in the next 10, 15 years, people are going to retire in the way perhaps they do today, or that they have done for the last kind of 10, 20, 30 years? Probably not. I suspect people want to do different things in their lives as they move on to different stages, and do that in a different way about how they work, how they live, how they, you know, bring value to a workplace that they want to be in, how they change careers, how they develop, all of that kind of stuff. Now that has impact and implication financially from an early age, actually, as to how much you think you need to going to save, what you want to do, how you might want to be thinking about drawing that down later on in life, and what that means for you. You know, and equally, what are the conversations that our customers should be having with their advisors, with ourselves, but also with their families about what that means to you from an intergenerational point of view. So I think it's a very wide-ranging conversation, you know, and part of, you know, the research that Lisa's done has really drawn out the power of those conversations. And I think, you know, at Canada Life, we're really keen to encourage those discussions amongst friends, amongst family, and as well as obviously from a professional point of view with your advisor and with your provider. So, you know, it's far-reaching and far-ranging, and you know, it is about health, it is about wealth, it is about work, it is about all of those things. And that's a very rich, broad conversation for our customers and for wider society to be thinking about.
Brilliant, thank you. And Lisa, can I just bring you into how people are living their lives differently?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you put the concept of longer lives to people and how they kind of feel about the prospect of longer life. You know, it's almost a oh great, oh crikey moment, all in the same breath. You can see it on their faces. It's really interesting. The instinctive reaction is, oh great, I'm living long. Oh crikey, how am I going to do that then? And I think that's because it kind of points to upsetting the presumed order of things. Exactly, you know, what you were saying, Lindsey. It's oh crumbs. What about this learn, work, retire piece? How is that going to play out? I'm going to be retired now for this long. How am I going to, you know, kind of finance that? And when, as you'll know, because you were there, when we were talking to customers in depth, face to face, they had that kind of realization about that. And I think we need to turn that presumed order on its head, make it more dynamic, make it more flexible. You know, we talk about kind of prepare, purpose, pleasure. How can we, you know, intermingle these things so that people feel prepared much earlier, and then start to perhaps play out purpose and pleasure in equal measure? as they go through their lives. I think that's the piece, and then the kind of response to this becomes, kind of that much more kind of positive and hopeful for people.
I think it was lovely to see in the research, wasn't it, that there was a sense of optimism about longevity, about, all the things that people could do if they are to live for longer. And, in many respects, the surprise, I think it's something like only about 17% of people kind of had heard of the 100-year life. Yeah. So there's a big surprise in the rest of the 83 that thought, they've got this kind of longevity ahead of them. But what was also really lovely to hear and read and understand was the level of excitement and optimism and engagement that came alongside that, as well as kind of, crikey, what am I going to do? But there is optimism and happiness, as there should be, about us all living longer and more fulfilled lives.
Yeah, totally. And that was the second set of pennies that dropped. It was like, hold on a minute. If I really start to play into the control of my life and be prepared for it, then the challenges become opportunities. I can travel. We know there's lots and lots of research to show that if you frame older lives more positively, that in and of itself helps you live longer, live a more fruitful life, recover quicker, be happier. Lots of research to show that. So it's about how we play into the preparedness, and organisations like Canada Life set people up for control in their life. And I think that's the power of the brand, right?
Thank you. Okay, so I've got a question for both of you. How do people feel about living longer?
I think, the conversation we've just been having, it kind of starts as a double-edged sword, but I think it plays through more positively once people kind of realise that the power is in their own hands. If they start to kind of do things earlier, subvert their natural expectations of life being kind of learn, work, retire, and externalise with their families, with their advisors, with the employers that they see every day, start to externalise what they need and get support from those around them, that those challenges start to become opportunities and they feel more positively about it. So I think there's a kind of a layering.
Yeah, and I think what your research brought out, Lisa, too, is depending on age today depends on quite how people were feeling about what bit. So and there's a younger generation that were already quite, really quite excited about living longer, yet weren't yet thinking about what that might mean and how they might approach that and how they might save for it and etc. And then there was this kind of, I think, this area in the middle of our age range that actually there was a little bit of fear about crumbs. There's a lot for me to think about in this and I don't know quite how I'm going to manage it, and I might be in the sandwich generation, I've got lots going on, and what about my health and what about this and what about that. And so actually there was a little bit of more kind of perhaps reflective. And then actually what was lovely, which we've just been talking about a bit more, is around that optimism as you talk to people later on in their lives, actually hearing that they're going to live longer was a really optimistic, positive thing for them about what they might do with that. And I think, the encouragement though about an earlier conversation is so critical. And it always strikes me as well when you think about your pension, and pension probably for young people isn't the most attractive, exciting word in their language, right? And I doubt they go down the pub and have a conversation about how much money they're putting in their pension every month. But I guess if you ask most people, so how much have you got saved in your pension today? The vast majority cannot answer that question, let alone even know where it is. Yes, if you ask somebody how much do you have in your bank account today, the vast majority of people can answer that question really quite accurately. And actually trying to get to a point where people are discussing this more, having more open conversations, kind of realising the connectivity between themselves and the money that they're saving is theirs, that's in their pension, is really important. It's almost like normalising the conversation and making it one that we do have with our friends, that we do have with our families, is really important to kind of help us all be thinking about what that means for us and how we're going to start to plan for it.
One of the things that the research showed us was how important life satisfaction is and how much planning and control can have an impact on how you feel satisfied. Lisa, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Right, okay, I'll don my anorak for this conversation. So typically life satisfaction has a U shape, and in fact all what we call eudaimonic measures have a U shape to them. So life satisfaction, life happiness, a sense of well-being, all of these sorts of things. And the bottom of that U, typically, as you were talking about that kind of midlife period, Lindsay, around the late 40s is the bottom of that U before it starts going up again. So here's the rub. Control and perceived control over one's life direction is the magic ingredient to kind of shallow out that U shape and kind of bring it much more into the positive much earlier. So the more that you get control through conversation, through support networks and so on, earlier in life, the more positive you feel about life satisfaction and the shallower that curve. So that's the arc of the story in terms of how we play into our consumers, and you know the kind of the pot at the end of that arc. That's the really exciting thing, and I think that we've seen the data for you shows that almost universally 90% of people who believe they've got some control over their lives through goal setting and so on are satisfied with their lives. 90%. Whereas only 2/3 of people in general are satisfied with their life. So that sense is absolutely critical, really striking.
That's really interesting. What are the things that are going to give people most control to give them the life satisfaction?
What we see coming through really strongly from the research is goal setting. So the earlier you have conversations about what you want, what your priorities are, you know, how you want your life to play out, how you think about your life, the more strongly you feel a sense of control. So it's those kind of conversations with those around you and those who can help you that drive that sense of control, and we saw that really abundantly in your research.
And of course it starts with family and friends, and then there's professional advisors to think about. What do you think the opportunities are there?
Well, you know, I think there's a whole spectrum of things that we need to be thinking about. So advisors, back to Lisa's point earlier, I think it is about lifetime planning. It is about helping people all the way through their life and what they might want to be doing, and not just about different touch points, but it's about, you know, us all recognising the value of advice and the value of having those conversations with professionals. This is a really complex area. You know, we work in it and it's still complicated, right? Actually, as an industry, in all seriousness, we do have responsibility to try to simplify and make it an easier conversation. But ultimately, this is difficult stuff that we're thinking about planning. So, you know, us working with advisors and our partners, and actually it is an industry conversation we had, and then with policymakers. So how are we influencing, how are we discussing, how are we really putting this on the agenda? You know, right at the outset, Lisa, you talked about the megatrend. There's lots of conversation about AI at the minute, isn't there? There's lots of conversation about sustainability, rightly so, and, you know, and climate change. You know, there's probably not enough conversation on longevity and the impact on our society, the impact on our finances, the impact on our health system, the impact, you know, it's very, very wide ranging. And it's a great opportunity. But to take the opportunity, we've got to start talking about it and planning for it.
Absolutely. And we found from the research, of course, that having professional advice is a really important part of feeling like you're in control when you get there. Have you got any reflections on that, Lisa?
Yeah, totally. I mean, we've worked with providers across the industry and indeed the regulator, and time again we see the value of advice coming through, whether that is in small chunks or in a continuous form. We saw from this data that those people who'd taken advice were typically more satisfied with their lives, felt more in control, and to your point earlier, Lindsay, felt more optimistic about the future. And I don't think it's just about the nature of the advice, it's about the act of speaking about it. So those kind of behavioural points where we just get started with those conversations are essential. We saw in the research that those people who just got started with savings suddenly started to feel in control. So the act of starting something, whether that's savings, whether that's advice, whether that's conversation with a family member, so essential to feeling generally more optimistic about life. I just have to tell you about, you might have heard him, I think you were in the room where the chap on one of the tables stood up. He was in his early 50s. And he says, I know when I've got to have a serious conversation with my son, or when he needs something, because he asked me to go for a ride in the car.
Yeah.
Which typically means he needs new tyres, and he wants me to experience that. But also that he wants to be able to have a conversation that's side by side, that doesn't feel so intense, but it's a way of starting.
It's so true, isn't it? All those conversations that happen in the car.
I know. Whether it's with our children or with our parents, equally as powerful. But I think the key point is, how do we start those? Can we help people with the situations that we start those in? And the same is true for colleagues as well. And I know you're doing loads on that front at Canada Life. So yeah, incredibly important.
And have you got a view on what the barriers are and how you'd overcome them?
It's difficult, right? I mean, we saw, it was really interesting, and nothing kind of more powerfully kind of shown, if you like, through the data on expecting to receive or expecting to give inheritance. So 2/3 of the people that we spoke to said they expected to give in an inheritance, leave money behind. Less than half expected to receive it. Now therein lies a vacuum of conversation. And in that vacuum usually lies tension. Who's going to receive this? Or, what's going to happen with that? Or how do my parents feel about that? We had a lot of conversation in our textual conversations with people around, well, I hope my parents don't expect to feel like they have to leave something for me. We want them to enjoy their older lives, or we want them to choose the best care for themselves. But it only happened in that facilitated conversation. Can we get that to the front? Because it is difficult. Lindsay was saying, it's a difficult thing to start. So how can we help that perhaps with prompts and creating the right situations?
Have you got any thoughts on that, Lindsay?
No, I think, from a barrier point of view, I think you're right in terms of there is some unspoken friction, isn't there? And I think there's a fear, right? There's a fear of what might come, where the conversation might lead to. And equally in all of this, there's a fear of uncertainty, I'm sure, right? We've got, nobody has all the answers in here. And I guess you open the box to start having the conversation, and you're going to reveal things that you can't answer. And so maybe some of that fear is a barrier as well to people. And for many, at an early age, actually it's really quite a scary thing too, particularly when you think about, both health and wealth. You start thinking about the amount of money that you might need to have saved in order to be able to support the longer life that hopefully we're all going to have. That can be quite a daunting sum of money, right? It actually can be quite scary for people. And so I do think there's this little bit of understandable head in sand, right, that becomes a barrier. So to Lisa's point, how do we help facilitate the conversation? How do we help provide the nudge, or just take the step over the precipice to be able to start having the conversation, and then it feels a lot easier.
So Lisa, what does the next 5 to 10 years look like? Get your magic crystal ball out?
Well, it's only going to go in one direction. The kind of the shape of life is changing, and it will continue to change. And what we really see is the kind of old model of getting to your kind of early to mid 60s, moving from the office chair to the armchair, and kind of switching off retirement will change. I talked a little bit earlier about purpose and pleasure. We think people are going to kind of live those hand in hand through what was once retirement, as you were referring to. So I think that we'll see people in a new version of active retirement much later, until much later, even their late 70s. You know, whether that's digital nomading around the world, you know, kind of being the local gardener, in whatever form they want to combine those things. But there'll be some kind of lovely choice, because we see that people actually, it's not they just need to work financially, you know, later in life, but also they want to, you know, sense of purpose and sense of self-value. It's the second most important thing after health, and it's one of the only needs that increases with age. So people want to feel that value until much later in life. So I think that combination of purpose and pleasure continuing through, perhaps starting earlier and continuing through to the late 70s, will be the new version of what we now think as retirement. And then people kind of then start to settle into a different phase kind of after that. So I think it's all to play for, but it's going in one direction.
What do you think that means for employers?
I think it means two things, or the things that it means are in two buckets. The first is structural. So I think the composition of the workforce will change, both in terms of the numbers of experienced people, not older, experienced people we employ, but also in how they're mixed with younger generations. We've seen lots of research to show that intergenerational groups working together, we saw it in the room when we talked to people face to face, work together very well, passing ideas and wisdom to each other. So I think structurally we'll change, but I also think the way that we put goals to people, we know that as we get older, we move from purely extrinsic goals, money, you know, promotion, pay, to much more intrinsic goals, you know, the reward for a good job. So I think how we kind of set that up for people as they get into their older years to make sure that they're rewarded in different ways will change too. So I think that's going to be really interesting, both of those buckets.
And in terms of what's next for Canada Life around this, how committed are we to this Life 100?
Well, incredibly committed. And, you know, I think just seeing the response to the research and the report in the first place, both from our own colleagues and then more widely, has really kind of confirmed, I guess, the excitement that we've all had as we've started to go through it. But there's lots more to go. The data is very, very rich. And actually, we need to spend the time focusing on different aspects of the data and what that means. And so we plan on continuing the conversation, you know, for many months to come about what this means for all of us. So this is just the start. And we're very pleased with how the conversation has started, but there's lots more of them to be had.
That was a brilliant conversation, really interesting. I think we covered a lot of ground there, and there's certainly more to come. I'd like to say thank you to Lindsey Rix-Broom, CEO from Canada Life UK, and Lisa Edgar, CEO from The Big Window.